Good morning, April O'Leary in Conway, South Carolina. I hope everyone's faring well with Hurricane Dorian on the horizon. And please reach out to us and let us know if you have any questions whatsoever. And I will be sure to share the links to everything that I share with you this morning. But I did want to quickly jump on and just talk with you a little bit about how Hurricane Dorian is being compared to Hurricane Matthew. But before we do, I just wanted to show you the current radar, where Dorian is currently and where we expect her to go throughout this afternoon. So it's clear that you have some time still to spend a few hours today preparing for Dorian and do any of those last minute preparations as needed. So let's get on to why I jumped on this morning. So our local chief meteorologist, Ed Piotrowski with WPDE, talked about Dorian in relation to Hurricane Matthew. And given some of the things that he shared last night, I thought it would be helpful to kind of review this great tool developed by the USGS. It's really a flood story map, or what we call a flood event viewer. But what they did is they worked with their partners to kind of show what the storm tide levels were, what the wave level datas were, and what the high water marks were. And so they ended up sending some field crews through our area to map some of these locations. And so I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that this tool existed. I did share a link in the group yesterday with this tool. A lot of folks commented that they really found it very helpful. But this is the map. It's the GIS map. And actually, they've added Dorian to this map, which is kind of cool. So you can really compare what the track was in Matthew compared to Dorian. And these historical and notable storage surge events, flooding events, rainfall events, hurricane events really gives us the vital information that we need to kind of help better prepare our communities to make sure that there is no risk to life. So they're really, really vital in helping determine, possible risks and future risks. So this is the map layers. You'll see the black triangles represent real-time stream gauges that were deployed. They also did some rapid deployment gauges in advance of Matthew's storm. Actually, I had a friend that was working on those projects before Matthew hit, which was really neat. We also have some storm tide sensors, as well as a wave height sensor. And then what I think is really valuable about this is these high water marks, which are these brown diamonds. So we're going to go ahead and close the map layer. And we're going to go ahead and take sort of a larger viewpoint here, where you'll see, as it relates to Matthew and the track that Matthew took, but also Hurricane Dorian. They've added Hurricane Dorian in here. So we see that, she's currently a Category 2 right off of the coast of Florida. And is expected to come to the southeast coast here in South Carolina sometime overnight tonight and to tomorrow, and should be out of here by Friday. And so we're going to zoom in and focus just on South Carolina here. And the map is a little bit slow. It does take a while for it to kind of catch up to what you're telling it to do. But you'll see that areas of South Carolina that are very vulnerable to storm surge are areas like Charleston. And we actually have flood survivors that we work with in Charleston on all the different concerns that we all share. But you'll see all of these high water marks when you have storm surge, impacts from hurricanes like Dorian and Matthew. You'll see a lot of this inundation from the ocean and all of these different high water marks. So, anytime you have the storm surge from a hurricane off the coast like this, the water just has no place to go. And so that large wave comes in and pushes water back and through our area and really just inundates a lot of these communities, especially around the tidal creeks. So you'll see Charleston, Mount Pleasant, all of these areas are really susceptible, especially as you have some of these areas here with these tidal creeks. And so all the way up through Georgetown, we have Winyah Bay here. Actually, you'll see how the line here represents Matthew. I mean, Matthew went right over Winyah Bay and just dropped large amounts of rain. And so, but you'll see that the storm surge in Matthew probably won't be nearly, wasn't as nearly as bad as what's possibly being predicted with Dorian, because we have Dorian kind of going off the coast. And whenever that's the case, it has the potential to push that storm surge in even farther and make those water levels even higher than what we saw in Matthew, because Matthew really went along the coast here, the coastline, and kind of then went off right off the coast. But in Myrtle Beach, actually, we have Dorian pretty close to the path that Matthew took. And so we could expect to see similar impacts from storm surge based on Hurricane Matthew. And I think that's why this tool is so helpful. You know, obviously, the closer to the coast, the storm surge potential kind of really either increases or decreases, just really based on where that path is. So that's why you have such a high range of storm surge forecasts at this point. I think the latest forecast showed anywhere between 3 to 7 feet, maybe even 8 feet of storm surge in some areas along the southeast coast. And so it really just depends on the path that Dorian takes. But I thought it would be great to kind of zoom in on some of these and just kind of show you what some of those high water marks are throughout our county. So you can really view any of these to kind of look and see where the storm surge was in Matthew, where those high water marks are. So Little River obviously is a high risk storm surge vulnerability area that we would be concerned about. And we have some great data here. We can click on one of these high water marks and it'll tell us what the elevation is there, which is 7.5 feet. And then it shows you we had a 2.39 foot storm surge with Matthew here at this high water mark. So that's one of the higher areas, and again, it's because of the type of land that's there, you know, the land use cover, and has it as at a pretty low elevation in one of these areas that is really just can be inundated by ocean water. So it's definitely a concern for us. This is Hog Inlet, and it'll show you right here under the description where the high water mark is. It's a seed line on the front door at residence 6210 at Nixon Street, marked with a black Sharpie, and they get really creative on where they document these high water marks. You know, we even have high water marks as it relates to debris, where the debris was pushed in. They'll do high water marks there because that debris shows us exactly where the water flew into or came into. So we'll click on another one here along the Atlantic Beach. Again, it shows you the elevation height at 8 feet, and there's a wood post there by the gate that shows you that we had a 1 foot storm surge. We'll move down to one of these areas over here along Myrtle Beach. You'll be able to see kind of in Myrtle Beach. We'll click on one of these. And again, the elevation there is at 9.6 feet, so clearly higher than Little River. And so you'll see the storm surge wasn't nearly as bad. And then it also gives you another description of where that high water mark is. If we go down to Surfside, which is a pretty significant urban area, you'll see here that the elevation is obviously much higher, and so therefore the storm surge wasn't nearly as bad. Now let's go to an area that's just over the county line, like Murrells Inlet, and again, this is kind of similar to Little River in a way, where the elevation is closer to 7.2 feet, and so you'll see that they actually had a 1 foot storm surge. So these are the reasons, you know, why Zone A was evacuated. That, you know, any time that you're going to have a storm surge inundation event like Dorian's predicted and forecasted to prevent, you know, these areas can really become inundated with storm surge, and quite quickly too. So oftentimes folks don't realize how quickly the storm surge can come in, and how that big huge wave of water, you know, really can contribute to, you know, significant flooding impacts. Now let's look a little bit in towards the innermost part of our county. Matthew, we had a lot of individuals that flooded along our water bodies. And so we had areas off of the PD, Great PD, Little PD, Intercoastal Waterway, Waccamaw River, and a variety of other rivers. But as it relates to Matthew, comparing that to Dorian, we just don't expect to see those same types of flooding impacts, just because Dorian's not going to stick around as long as Matthew did. It's not going to stall out over us. They're forecasting that it'll be out of here in about 24 hours, really. And so, we do expect anywhere between 10 to 15 inches of rainfall that could fall along the coast, especially, and a little bit further inland, depending on the track of Dorian. We could see rain bands up to 15 inches. But again, it's not going to stall out like Florence and Matthew did and drop large rainfall accumulations into our watershed. And so based on what Ed was saying last night, these areas here in Rosewood, if we want to take a look at, the elevation in Rosewood in that community in Socastee is about 8.2 feet. And so it'll show you here how there was a 1.5 foot storm surge based on Hurricane Matthew. And so, and it also tell you exactly where the high water mark is marked. So you can actually go to that location even today and say, okay, how does that relate to my property and how high my property is? But again, part of the reason why we saw these impacts is that there was just large rainfall amounts. So we had a lot of coastal flooding as well as storm surge. But really what made those water bodies flood was the rainfall accumulations, those flash flooding impacts, as well as, just significant amounts of rainfall that fell watershed-wide. So we don't expect to see those same kind of impacts here with Dorian. Certainly we'll see flash flooding. Certainly we'll see, some flooding, but we just don't see the high water marks being the same, which is really, really good news for communities like Rosewood. But again, the closer that you are to the coast, where we have some inundation coming in through these water bodies like Winyah Bay, we will see some impacts along these areas. So, we could take a look and see how this elevation is only at 7 feet. And we had a little bit of flooding there, not as bad, obviously. And this is actually in a dugout at the baseball field at Morgan Park, which is kind of cool. One that I like to show, and I see if I can find it. Yep, this is the debris. So here we have a high water mark. The elevation was 6 feet. We don't have a height above ground, but it does show that there was debris here in front of Hobcaw House near the water. So that's kind of how they show what the high water mark was for that region. Which is really kind of cool. So, obviously, the more that you have these tidal creeks in areas like this, the greater the risk. We have some of these here in Pawleys where we will expect to see some really significant impacts. Here we don't have, let's see, an elevation. Let's look at here. Okay, so again, an elevation at 7.4 feet, and we had a 1.23 foot storm surge here. And so, this is basically some of these areas in here where they're much more susceptible to storm surge, obviously. Here we had a 1.5 foot storm surge, and this is an elevation of 6.4 feet. So, again, Dorian is expected to produce anywhere between 3 to 7 feet of storm surge. So it looks like, based on the latest forecast, that the storm surge will be worse than what Matthew was. But again, this is a really helpful tool, so it'll be able to help you determine and really just kind of justifies why we essentially did the evacuations. And this is a great example here where we have in this location here right near Myrtle Beach State Park, we have an elevation of 7.7 feet, and we saw over a 2 foot storm surge here near Jetty Drive. So Obviously those families were at risk. Garden City really also was severely impacted by Matthew, but again, 1 foot storm surge here, and it just kind of shows you. But you'll see some of these high water marks. Again, an over 1 foot storm surge. We're in here because Main Creek, obviously gets those impacts, and the further the storm surge and the greater that wave is, really will push water in these areas. So we have homes in these sections here. Along these areas, if we want to take a look at some of these homes, again, it was a 1.5 foot storm surge here with an elevation of 7.6 foot. So there was a property here that that there's a partition wall near fourth pillar. And so this is when we start to see a lot of flooding impacts and possible property damage. And so especially if we get the storm surge that's predicted as it compares to what we saw in Matthew. Again, we have some homes here that you can look at. The elevation here is really, really low at 6.9 feet, and they saw an over 1 foot storm surge. So I wanted to make sure I jumped on and showed this to you. Hopefully it won't be worse than Matthew. Hopefully Dorian will kind of just push off to the east even a little bit more, which is still quite a possibility, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Obviously, we're still in that cone of uncertainty, and as you can see, as we start to zoom out and we look at the cone here with Dorian, it's just really too soon to tell what those storm surge impacts are going to look like, based off of the current forecast. I mean, we could certainly see Dorian making landfall even, or just off the coast making those storm surge impacts possibly even worse than what's on the high side of things, or she could shift out more east into the ocean, and those storm surges will be closer to what Matthew was. So we'll just have to see. Like I said, it's too soon to tell, but at this point, she is moving north-northwest. She's expected to turn, and that will really be able to tell us a lot more when that happens. It says here that she's expected to turn sometime around 2 a.m. on Thursday, and once that happens, we'll have a much better understanding of what that track is going to be like as it starts to hit our county and impact our county. So, it's great that they actually evacuated Zone A. And we'll just pull up, some of the impacts that we expect to see. Obviously, the greatest risk for flash flooding is really around the coast. We'll take a look at this image here. We're looking at anywhere between 6 to 15 inches, depending on where we are and where you are located in the county. So that's our potential for rainfall at this point based on the latest forecast. And then obviously flash flooding risk. Parts of our county are high risk for flash flooding and moderate risk for flash flooding. And then obviously, marginal and slight at the further that you go west. So we'll just have to see. And that's really all I wanted to show you today. So again, I'll be sure to kind of share the link to this great resource. I'm really, really grateful to USGS for all their hard work and making sure that these areas get mapped to better inform our residents what their vulnerability is to storm surge and flooding, but also to make sure that we have this information so we can better prepare our communities as it relates to future land use development and those types of decisions, and how we can work together to decrease risk, And I hope everybody fares well during Dorian. Again, if you have any questions or you need any assistance in determining what your flood risk may be, feel free to ask any of us in the group. And I hope everybody fares well during Dorian. Please let me know if you have any questions. Just make sure to tag me, and we'll talk to you really soon.